Deborah Pocalas is a loving daughter with no medical background who was thrust into an unimaginable situation and tried her best to help her father survive and thrive. This is a story of elder exploitation. Deborah, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
Your story touches on some of the most painful realities that caregivers can face. Things like family conflict, betrayal, exploitation. Can you start by sharing what happened with your father and how things began to shift in your family?
Okay, my mother died, and after my mother's death, it was devastating to my father, and he was depressed and alone. And for a time, the family rallied around him, and we made sure that holidays were celebrated and that, we were there for him and we helped him out. And things did start to shift. I live about an hour and a half away from where my father lived, so I was not able to see day to day what was going on. But I got feedback and just odd little comments that were being made about me and about other people in the family. You kind of blew it off because you didn't expect anything to go wrong in your family. It's your family. So, I addressed certain concerns. There was one concern that came back to me that, Deb's after the house, which was kind of ludicrous. I don't have a family, and I'm have a small apartment as it is, and I barely take care of that. So for me to take over a 3+ bedroom house with an acre of land, I don't know where that came from. But I addressed it with my family because I wanted to make sure they understood that, whatever happened, whatever went on after my parents were gone, that this was something that we would be a family about. And then today happens to be my dad's birthday, which is one of the reasons why I chose today. And on a similar weekend, many years ago, I got a call from a sibling who asked me about my father's assets and investments. And my older sibling and I, there's 5 of us in the family. I have an older sibling and 3 younger siblings, 2 of whom are considerably younger than me. My parents had 2 more kids when I was in college. So I got this phone call asking me about, did Dad have money? Did he have assets? And I said, oh, yeah, he invested heavily. And it's probably at this point worth $1.5 to $2 million. And then I heard the 4 most chilling words I've ever heard in my life. My sibling said, well, it's gone now. Everything was taken by another sibling. And so you deal with the shock of that, and then you have to deal with the situation. The things first thing that I did, fortunately for me, I had a friend who was a former U.S. attorney, and I didn't know what to do. So I contacted him, and he stepped in, and we hired him to help. So fortunately, I got advice on how to handle this properly. But I will tell your listeners, one of the problems with this is how can we do something about it? It's family. Anybody who does something like that to your parents, they cease to be family. And you have to treat it as in a dispassionate way. So what we did was, what I recommend to everyone is if you find out that something like this happens, you call the authorities, you get the police, you get a police report. Not just for this, to have it. It's documentation of what happened. And if the situation progresses where you do have to go to court, the more documentation on what has happened, the better. So we hired private detectives who are former FBI agents to go over to the siblings' house and investigate. And they did. And they took pictures of what was taken. They questioned my sibling, and they gave us a report. So again, we got documentation. We also called the county prosecutor's office, and they sent a detective out who also interviewed and got them to the sibling to admit that they took it, and not only that they took it, and they claimed that it was for safekeeping, but they were spending it quite nicely. Also, because of the county prosecutor's detective that came out, we discovered that my father's pension checks, because they were not direct deposited, were gone. They had been disappearing. They weren't making it into his bank account. So all he had was his Social Security payments to live on. So based on that, recommendation number one is you don't handle this as a family. I mean, you can try, but you get authorities involved, and you get that documented, because that did help us down the line when it came to other legal issues that came up. The fact that we had this all documented, and you don't know where it's going to go, so it's best to lay this out and take care of this right from the get-go. Then when the theft was discovered, after that point, what happened was the sibling who took everything was taking my father to doctor's appointments, because the sibling lived closest. And we found out that the sibling was telling this doctor that doctor diagnosed my father with Alzheimer's, and this doctor diagnosed, this other doctor diagnosed. So it was all over my father's medical records. And he most likely did not have Alzheimer's. And one of the things that I want to make sure to tell your listeners is there are many conditions that mimic Alzheimer's. In my father's case, he had all of the symptoms of what's called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is an accumulation of fluid on the brain. The three major symptoms of that are so wildly unrelated, it goes many times undiagnosed. First one is cognitive problems, which he had, and memory problems. The second is incontinence. And the third is your gait, the way that you walk. Your legs, your feet become so heavy you can't pick them up. So people walk shuffling. My father just slid his feet along because he couldn't pick them up. And they have trouble turning. And those, they seem to be completely unrelated, but they are indications of this condition. And you can recover from it. It's treatable, and you can recover from it. So what happened was, because this was in medical records, not only did it shut down my father being able to get any other kind of evaluation, but it also, because Alzheimer's is untreatable, incurable, and terminal, it shut down pretty much all of his other medical care as well. So my recommendation to everybody, make sure you know what's in your medical records, yourself too, because what one doctor writes down in a toss-away comment could affect the ability for you to get medical care in the future. So what came after that, then we found out that my father, the two other siblings, were working on getting my father under their guardianship. And that is a process, and we can talk about that later. So it was a long, drawn-out, very expensive process. I learned a lot, and like in a few minutes, we can talk about that. How ugly can it get when family turns on family? One instance that I can give you, I would go up to see my father twice a week. I drove up and spent the day with him. And at one point, he got a live-in caregiver who was a blessing from God. The guy was so phenomenal a person, and he took care of my father like my father was his. But what happened was, when he would be there for a couple of months, and then of course he needed a break, so he would be off for a couple of weeks, and we would get substitutes in. And they were very nice people, but they were not the best equipped to take care of my dad. So we were concerned about my father possibly falling, or something happening when somebody wasn't there who was better at the job. So they set up a camera on and kept the camera on my father so that he could be observed, and other family members could observe him. Problem was, they didn't use the camera to observe the caregiving. They used it to observe me on my visits. So my visits became, I would do something with my dad. I'd be sitting with my dad, and like one time I wiped his face with a tissue. 5 minutes later, I get a call from my attorney who said he got a call from their attorney demanding to know what I was doing to my father. My father was crying, and I was wiping away his tears. Then, because they also gave him antipsychotic drugs, which aren't supposed to be given to the elderly, and certainly not to elderly people who are supposedly been diagnosed with dementia, my father started shaking uncontrollably. He had the tardive dyskinesia. It was so bad that he would grip his arms, and he bruised himself horribly because he was trying to stop. So when I would go for a visit, for the time that I was there, I would sit there and I would rub his arms and his legs just to stop that for a short time and give him some relief. Bingo, phone call that I was inappropriately touching my father. And that actually was put in front of a judge. So what I did, I loaded up my laptop with filming equipment, filming software. And from the time I walked into my parents' house to the time I left, I had every moment I was with my father filmed for myself. And it gets ugly, and that's what happened, but that's what I did to protect myself and my father. The other thing that I wanted to mention to people, because my father expressed a lot of fear about the people who eventually took his money. And I learned this kind of after the fact. First of all, he was on a lot of different medications. They took the medications out of the house, and they would fill up a box and they would deliver the box to him. So he didn't have access to his original prescriptions, and they used that to control him. He said at one point he was afraid if he did not do as they told him to do, that he wouldn't get his medications, and one of them was for his heart. Also, when I looked in the box, on one occasion, I found a little something extra that looked kind of suspicious. It was dismissed, but that was something else. So recommendation to people in this situation, get a box and put your daily doses in it. And then take your prescription bottles, because that has information on there that you might not want other people to have, and put them somewhere in your home, not your kitchen, not your bathroom, somewhere in your home where nobody would look. Or if they're going to go look, you're going to know that they're going and looking, because they're going to have to go rooting through things. The other thing that we tried to set up with my dad, and it didn't work that well, was we tried to set up a code system for him. We had an next door neighbor who was very, very kind. And we told my dad that if he did not want these siblings in his house, he had every right to throw them out. But he was afraid of them. So a bar did this in New York. They came up with this system for women on bad dates. If you were on a bad date and wanted to go home, you went up to the bar, ordered an angel shot, and they would call you a car and escort you out to the car. And then they had another drink where they would call the police immediately. So we kind of wanted to work out a system. I don't remember what it was, but call the neighbor and say, "Oh, I need milk." And what that means to the neighbor is come over here and make an excuse that we've got something to do and they have to leave. And then, if it gets to a situation where you perceive danger, have a different code for the neighbor to call the police. But it didn't get to that point. And it didn't really work because my father was really afraid that they would withhold his medications if he didn't let them in the house, if he didn't change his will, if he didn't change his paperwork, all that kind of stuff. So he did their bidding. And that's where it ended up. I fought a good fight. I have some regrets, but I know that at the very least, I did my best for my dad. And it was a traumatic and grueling 10 years of dealing with this. So that's kind of the story.
Wow. Deb, there's so much to unpack there. I think I'm sure the listeners could, hopefully no one has experienced it, but I know from practice that that's not true. And this does happen, unfortunately, fairly common.
Very, very common. It might not happen to the degree that it happened to me, but oh my God, when I started talking to people about it, I heard stories, so many, about people who have gone through the same thing. It's heartbreaking.
Well, first and foremost, happy birthday to your dad in heaven. I think he'd be really proud of you for speaking up for the things that you two went through together. All those tips and tricks on what to do and how to manage some things, I think that's great. I think it's a great way for people to understand that there are ways to, manage some of these situations. But I want to backtrack and talk about, how do these things start? I think when we first talked, you mentioned that one of your siblings, this sibling who was involved, began isolating your dad and turning him against the others. And so what were some of those early warning signs that now looking back, you recognize were actually red flags and the start of all of this unfolding?
Well, the sibling who ended up causing the underlying problem actually at one point moved in with my father, under the pretenses that they were that their home had become uninhabitable. So they moved in. And I will say this. I don't know why I started, but I started keeping not a journal, but writing down what happened. And in hindsight, I realized it was an amazingly fabulous thing to do, because what happens is you discover patterns. When you write down the interactions that I had with my dad, I kept track of them. And it was just a sentence or two. If something weird, he said something weird or something strange happened, I would jot it down with the date and sometimes even the time. And what I noticed was that I would call him at one point, and he would say, "I can't talk to you. I got to go," and hang up on me. And I'd be like, "That's weird." And then I would call him the next day, later on, and we would have a fabulous conversation. And this went on and on until I looked at the times when these were happening. If I called him in the evening, "I can't talk to you. I got to go. I'm not supposed to talk to you. Hang up." And if I called during the day, when they were at work, I had no problem communicating with my father. That's what was confirmed to me later on, was that they were listening in on my conversations with my father on an extension. Yeah. And then, berating him if he said something that they didn't like or whatever. So he got punished for talking to me. And I didn't realize that was happening. My aunt gave me a great advice. My father would go to church every morning. He went to morning mass. And she, at one point when this was going on, I'm like, I don't know, is he maybe losing it or something? Something's wrong with him physically. And she said, "Well, you need to go see him." And she said, "If you go see him at the church, show up at church, go where he goes, so that he can't keep you out of the house and you can get to see him." And one time, the first time I went up there and went to the mass, he was showing me off. "This is my daughter," all this kind of stuff, and so happy to see me, and kept looking over at me during the whole mass and patting my leg and everything. But then that started to go, things got a little worse. And the next time I showed up, he was screaming at me, "I got to stay away from you. I have to stay away from you." And the little old church ladies were gathering around him, and they were telling me, "He's supposed to stay away from you." So this was what was being done to my dad. And this was before we found out about the theft. Fortunately, at that time, one of my other younger siblings was still, she was still engaged in protecting my dad. So this is how I got a lot of my information. She was around, and she was telling me what was going on. And so when I got the phone call that the theft had happened, at that point, I was able to go and see my dad. And when I came in and I just said, Dad, I am so sorry. And he just broke down. I never saw my dad like this in my whole life, just sobbed. And I just held him. There wasn't much I could do at that moment other than to just hold him and tell him how sorry I was and tell him that we would do whatever we could to help him. And actually, after that moment, he apologized to me for the way that he had treated me, because he said, I didn't know. I was being told things about you, and I didn't know whether or not they were true. And so we did have a moment where at least that was straightened out in the family. But the isolation for my dad, they took his car keys. They would not let him drive. He was in a little fender bender in the parking lot. He pulled out of a parking space, and there were big cars in between two people, and so they came out and met in the middle. And it was an accident, but he was treated as being somebody who was not going to drive, and they took his car keys, so he was isolated in the house as well. They went through his mail. So even when I tried writing letters to him, I didn't know whether or not he was getting them because they would go through his mail. But I think in terms of red flags, it was the way my dad dealt with me that was the first red flag. Unless you know that he's absolutely been diagnosed with something, some kind of condition or disease, there is something else going on. And I just fought through it. I fought to get to spend time with my dad. And I did not allow my father screaming at me to keep me from him. I just kept at it. Aside from the fact that I drove an hour and a half up to see you, Dad, I'm not going home without seeing you. I'm going to be pretty darn stubborn on this point. So I did get in, even when he was being told to stay away from me, I did get get a chance to talk to him a couple of times and ask him what was going on. And he wouldn't tell me. And it was apparent that something was getting through to him that, why would this person be, that I wasn't after anything, because I wasn't asking him for anything. As a matter of fact, I had taken some stocks of his. He gave them to me, and he says, if you want this, they were penny stocks. They weren't worth much. But what I did was I went down to a broker and I got the process in place on how to get them converted from my mother's name to his. And I did all the paperwork so that they would become his. So I think when I came back to the house, I figured, all right, I can use this as an opportunity to talk to him. And when I came back to the house and I gave him this stuff and I said, Dad, I did all this paperwork for you so that you could transfer the stocks into your name. I think that really surprised him because he had given them to me and it wasn't mine to take. And even if he had given it to me, it didn't belong to me. And I didn't know what was going on. And and besides that, it was part of his estate too. It belonged to, after he was gone, it belonged to all the family. So when I gave that back to him, I think that made an impression on him that maybe I wasn't after stuff, after taking things from him, since I was returning it. So, it was a very, very difficult. But as I said, once the theft happened, then the dynamic changed. Because
I think there's a big lesson here for medical providers too, to always verify what caregivers are telling them
Yeah.
about the patient,
Yeah.
right? I like to think that that's best practice. I know in reality that probably doesn't happen very often because doctors do get stretched thin and they want to rely on the family members to provide an accurate health background and, all of that. But because of cases like these, it's incredibly important that the doctor then says, okay, can you give me the name of that doctor? I will verify with them and get the reports over, right? Because that adds a layer of verification.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, my other siblings and I searched for a new doctor for him because we wanted to get somebody. First of all, we wanted to get somebody who would listen to my father and not to another member of the family. And we found a fabulous, fabulous doctor that had rave reviews. And we set up an appointment for him. And one of the questions, they sent out a questionnaire, and they one of the questions was, are you afraid of somebody in your family? So my sibling, whose professional background fit with this, wrote exactly what was going on. And when we when I took my dad for the appointment, here's a couple of other things that I learned from a really wonderful doctor. I had trouble sometimes when I went to my dad's house. He would sleep in the recliner in the living room, which was only about maybe at most 10 feet from the front door. I'd ring the doorbell. He wouldn't even move. I would pound on the door. Nothing from my father. I even went and pounded on the window right next to him. Nothing. So I asked the doctor, I said, is it possible that people could be drugged? Because at this point, the guardianship action was going in place. So the other siblings were dragging my fathers to doctors to have them verify that he was indeed incapable, incompetent, and everything. So I asked the doctor, is that possible that he could be drugged and that this could be affecting his cognitive abilities? He said, oh, absolutely. He said, it is scary how easy it is to get medications. And he said, and even aside from narcotics and prescription drugs, he said, even sometimes Benadryl can cause someone to be completely foggy brained and not be able to focus and not be able to process information, depending upon how much you give them. You can it makes you drowsy, and if you give people enough, it can cause that. I mean, I'm not saying that was what happened, but that is something that I learned that I was not aware of. And that's something else to watch out for. Keep track of somebody's medications.
Yeah. A lot of what you've mentioned really highlights how elder exploitation in whichever capacity can happen so quietly and in the dark behind the scenes, right? Unless, like you said, you're writing down every weird thing that happens in a journal and then trying to find patterns, or if you're showing up at unannounced times and seeing something happen, or if you're hearing from neighbors or trusted people that something's going on. Unless you have any of that in place, this can happen completely in the dark and you have
Absolutely.
no idea that it's happening, right?
Absolutely.
And so once you started identifying these patterns and realizing like something's wrong, something's going on, was it the theft that really sparked you to act? And then also before the theft happened, what made it so hard to intervene, just even from noticing that something was wrong?
It's hard to intervene if like I said, my father was being isolated and he was pushing me away. So that made it nearly impossible. And yes, what happened was the triggering of incident was the theft. And in that moment, my father finally realized that there were people who harmed him, that he had trusted, and it broke that trust. And when that trust was broken with those people, it gave me an opportunity to step in and do something. If you don't have an incident like that, the only thing that I can recommend is what I saw with my father in that one moment when I gave him back his possessions and said, "Here, Dad, these are yours." And he realized there was a moment of realization that well, maybe I could be wrong about her. So if you're in that situation and you suspect that somebody is bad mouthing you, the best thing that I can recommend is to show up and show who you really are. Don't engage in the bad mouthing of other people. Just keep reinforcing with that person that you're there to help them, that you want them to thrive, you want them to be happy. What can I do to make sure you're cared for, to make sure you're happy? I don't want anything from you. I want, you took care of me the whole time I was growing up. This is my opportunity to take care of you. What can I do for you? And if you keep it on that level and you keep showing up that way, it makes it more difficult for people to say that you have some kind of nefarious agenda. It's not guaranteed because, people do behave that way when they want something too. But, the more that you demonstrate that you are there for them, to take care of them and to look after them and to be supportive of them, it can help. And
yeah, I really agree with how you mentioned, like, don't drop to their level and start bad mouthing them, right? Like it turns into a blame game, a he said, she said situation. But instead, just show up as yourself and offer and show really, like, here's who I am, here's what I'm here for, how can I help you, versus even addressing all the other stuff that might be happening behind the scenes.
And if you do get an opening, because I did, to ask them why they feel that way about you. Was it something that I did? Maybe I made a mistake. Did I do something wrong? Or, did you think that I did something to hurt you? Tell me what it is so that I can make it right. If I did screw up, let me make it right. And take those opportunities too.
Yeah. Something you mentioned early on is guardianship and all of that was going on in the background. Legal systems are overwhelming as they are, right? There's so much paperwork. There's so many logistics. There's so many policies and regulations around paperwork and just next of kin, especially when there's so many siblings involved, right? And so it's extra overwhelming in situations like this. Mm-hmm. What did you learn through the guardianship process that you wish more families understood ahead of time? And for our listeners, maybe explain, like, what does guardianship mean and what does that look like?
Well, guardianship is also called conservatorship. And, we've heard of Britney Spears, we've heard of Wendy Williams, and it's where somebody else is appointed to make your decisions for you. And the one point that I want to make sure everybody understands is guardianship is not hard and fast. It can be negotiated. What we came up with was a guardianship agreement. And there were terms in there that we negotiated. Some of them I did not like. Some of them I'm glad we did. For example, one of the things that we said was that all of the children had HIPAA rights from my dad. So we had the rights to get his medical records. We had the right to talk to his doctors. Now, we didn't have, if we weren't the guardians, we could not make medical decisions for him, but we did have the right to contact and speak to doctors, which I took liberal advantage of, trying to get my father the care that he should have had. You can negotiate things like, in there it said you can't disparage each other in front of your father. You can't, that everybody was able to visit, and there was going to be no restrictions on visiting. You can negotiate, and this is one thing I wish I had thought to do. The doctor that my father really loved, he wasn't going to, they didn't want him going to him anymore. You can negotiate who his medical care team is. All of those things, whatever your concerns are about in your specific circumstances, if you're not able to be the guardian for whatever reason, and you've got kind of the family flake, there's a flaky person in the family, and they're the only possible person who's available to be in that position, you can put guardrails in place to make sure that they do the job the way they're supposed to. And But I will say this, it is very difficult to change or get rid of a guardianship. It is, because the court system doesn't like to do that. It takes forever. It's hugely expensive. So if you feel that you are the best person to be the guardian of the person in question, you fight for it, everything you've got. Because what happened in our case, one sibling argued with my older sibling and I about, this is my line of work, I know how to do this, I can make sure dad's taken care of, all down the list. And we had our reservations, serious reservations about allowing that, but we gave in. No sooner was the ink dry on that guardianship than that sibling betrayed all of us. And it was over. And that's when the real legal battle came in. So my best advice to you is you fight for everything that you think that you want. And you fight to be the guardian if you think you're the best person for it. And don't let and the only way that you give up the fight is if the judge says, nah, we're not going to let you do it. Because again, it is very difficult. The other thing that I recommend for everybody, myself, I joked with my attorney. I said, you know what? I'm putting in all of my final papers. I want a restraining order on all of my siblings. But most people, and my attorney came back to me and says, well, if you have the person you want being your power of attorney or whatever, you're good. No, because my father had it set up. And again, he was afraid and he did as he was told. He changed the will. He was told to cut the two oldest siblings out of the will, which he did. He didn't even realize that was what was being done. And he was very upset when he found out and he wanted to change it, but it was too late. He was under guardianship and that wasn't going to happen. What you can do and what everybody should do is, if there is a specific person in your life you do not want to have anything to do with your medical decisions or your legal decisions, you put that in your medical power of attorney, you put that in your durable power of attorney, you put that in your living will, you put it everywhere. You put it in your medical records. Because if it comes up and you get in a situation, God forbid, where you are in this position and somebody is pressuring you to change your paperwork and you feel like you're under threat and you do it anyway, when it comes to, if you have the advocates on the outside, they go into court and say, look, it's all over the medical records. This person was afraid of this sibling or child. They put it in all their papers. They did not want them in charge. Now, all of a sudden, somehow, when this person has questionable decision-making ability, now all of a sudden they put themselves in charge. Those things help. Document. I say that all the time to people. Document everything. So, and when it came to, for example, going to the prosecutor's office or even going to the police, the chances of the authorities getting involved in something like this, a personal theft like this, are not great. They push you into the civil court system. However, again, the documentation that you get from reporting this, from having investigated by authorities, helps you down the line. If you don't know where it's going to go, hopefully everything will work out without having to go to the extreme that happened in our family. But make sure you have it documented. And for people in that position and for people like me, if you are going to give people things outside of your will, write it down. Write down what you have in your home, who you want to get certain things. Make sure that that's, again, documented, because it helps in a tremendous way, all of this. So,
yeah, documentation is definitely the number one thing that I tell everybody to, especially when it comes to long-term care planning, guardianship planning, and end-of-life care planning. It's one of those things where you have to have things written down. I've seen way too many situations in the hospital where someone has, a patient has 3, 4, 5 kids, and then the kids can't agree on things, and that results in suffering for the patient, for the parent, right? And that is something that I talk about a lot, is the documentation piece.
Yeah, because there are standard forms for a medical power of attorney. There's standard living will forms. You can add to that. If there are specific things that you want, put them down. Because even if you have a great family situation and everybody loves everybody else, consider the fact that if you go into a medical emergency, your family gets notified, they're all rushing to the hospital, they're all going through grief, fear, maybe even some anger, whatever. There's this huge, overwhelming tsunami of emotions. They all come to the hospital, and then the doctor walks in and says, "So what do you want me to do?" But if you have it outlined as best you can as to what steps to take, if your medical records have everything in them that you can possibly put in there, then that takes the burden off of even the most loving family who wants the best for you. It takes that burden off of them because the doctors have the information that they need to go. They can walk into the waiting room and say, "Look, this is the situation with your parent. This is what is in their medical records. So here's the things that we can do based on their condition that we know of. This is what they said in their living will. This is what they told us they do and don't want. So here's the plan. Is this all right? Or, do you have any other questions or anything else you want to do?" And it takes a huge burden off of people. It takes a burden off of your medical power of attorney too, because they're not going with you necessarily to every single doctor's visit. They don't know. And then all of a sudden they got to make a decision for you. And no matter how much they care about you, they could spend the rest of their life second guessing whether or not they did the right thing. And it's just such a tremendous burden.
Yeah, well, and that's where, yes, it takes the burden off of them, but it also takes away that guilt afterwards if something goes wrong, right? If that's another part that gets talked about a lot, is caregivers often start feeling a lot of guilt after their care recipient passes away due to different decisions that maybe they had to make because there was no medical power of attorney or advance directive or any of that. So you became in charge of making those decisions, and you didn't know what he would have wanted, right? And so you end up making a decision that maybe, regardless would have ended in death, but because you made that decision, you hold yourself accountable for it, even though it was outside of your control. And it results in guilt, shame, resentment from the other siblings, right? Because they didn't have to deal with it, or they didn't deal with it, right? And so, all of the feelings can be minimized or completely avoided if proper documentation is in place.
You just made me think of another point. And one thing you have to realize is that when this kind of stress comes on a family, when there's somebody to be cared for and there's decisions to be made, every single tiny little grievance between siblings comes out. You always thought I was a baby. You never trusted. It all comes out. And so you have to navigate that too. So again, when you have everything outlined so that the decision-making process is better, you don't end up with every time somebody poked you in the car when you were on a ride and you hated that comes out. And so it's something that you have to deal with and navigate too.
Yeah, I think since you brought that up, you've said that this experience destroyed a lot of parts of your family. And so how have you worked through that grief of not just losing your dad, but also losing your family in the process of it?
Yeah, it's very hard. I only really have contact with one sibling. And that's, it's okay. It's hard. I think rather than grief, it's sadness. And not just sadness at what I lost, but sadness at what they lost. Because the rest of the family, each sibling is alone. I still have contact with one of my siblings, but the others are alone. And maybe there might be some contact with them, I don't know, but they've all moved away. Well, they're all in different locations and they're far apart. And I think the biggest part of my sadness is that they have children, and these children will never know the family. And we're human beings and we're interconnected, and it's important for you to have some sense of belonging. And when that break happens, it's not just the fact that I don't have siblings anymore. It's that I don't know their children, and their children don't know me. Their children really didn't get to know my parents that well. They're not being, the family's not being talked about. There's not that interaction where we talk about and reminisce and talk about what we meant as a family, and who we were as a family, and how, going back to my grandparents and my great-grandparents, the values of our family. That kind of stuff isn't being passed on, and it's going to be lost. Once my generation goes, it's lost to the next generation. So,
well, and if it is being passed on, you don't know how it's being passed down.
That's true,
right?
Too. That's also true. I did reach out to a couple of my siblings' kids. I tried to reach them when they went away to college, but I didn't have their exact address, so things came back undelivered. So it was unfortunate. But, it is what it is. And it's sad, because when I talked to a cousin of mine and my father's sister, and we talk a lot about the family get-togethers, and we reminisce, and it was so happy, and it was so much fun to be together. And it doesn't exist anymore. So it's not so much grieving the loss as it is just a profound sadness that it's not there anymore. And I keep the relationships that I have with my family, and I still have that connection to my heritage and my ancestry. So I didn't lose a tremendous amount. And I just hang on to that and stay with the people that, have been around, and build the family that I have, and carry on the way my parents lived family with the people who are left. And, it is what it is. That's pretty much all you can do. It's hard.
Yeah, I can relate to that for other reasons. But yeah, it is what it is. And you do the best you can and maintain the relationships that are still good for you and that are still involved.
Yeah. And the only other thing that is very hard, and I lost a lot, not just in family, but this cost me my retirement money. It's hugely expensive. And originally, another sibling was, we were doing this together, but then that sibling decided that they didn't want to be paying for anything anymore. And so in the middle of the worst of it, I was basically abandoned. So I went through a whole lot, basically all my money. I had my own business. It was doing really, really well. But because of the extraordinary expenses, all of the money that the business made went into paying for my living and also for legal fees. So I didn't have the money to put back into my business. So this is 6 years after my father's death, and it's still a struggle. And the hard part is, and it's a lesson I learned and I'm still working on, it's very easy to start resenting people. You see the other relatives, they're comfortable, they're living well, not phenomenally well, but they can meet their expenses. And then I'm struggling. It's very easy to get into resentment, but it does absolutely nothing for you to do that, because ultimately it's not going to affect the people who are living nicely in their homes and whatever, it's not going to affect them. They don't care. And the only person it's going to hurt is you, because it's going to it's going to be an obstacle for you being able to move forward in your life. And it is a very hard thing to do, because every time you get hit with something else, another difficulty, it is so easy and so human to lapse into, why me? Look at everybody else. They didn't do any, whatever it is. And that's the biggest thing that you have to fight. And what I have to do in those instances is say, okay, I'm in this situation. Was it worth it? Yes, it was. With all that I lost, if I had to go back in time and do it again, I would do it again without hesitation. So when I know that even whatever circumstances, whatever negative circumstances happened to me, that I did what I felt was right and I did what I felt was best, I have to keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah. You told me that you were eventually able to spend time with your dad at the end of his life. What did those final moments teach you or help bring closure to?
It actually, I'm going to try not to cry.
It's okay.
My dad was, he was basically homebound. So when you go to visit somebody who's homebound, it becomes kind of, the world shrinks. And so when you have those moments with somebody, I got an opportunity to see who my dad was. You spend your life with your parents, the authority figures in your life. They tell you can't do something. You say, I hate you, and you rebel and all this. And then you go off into the world and you make your own life. And how much do you really know about your parents? And I mean, my parents taught me integrity. They taught me equality. They taught me a lot of really valuable lessons. But I never really got to know how truly sweet my father was until I spent that time with him. And we talked about things. And he loved movie musicals. So that's what we spent our time doing, watching Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly movies. But it also gave me a chance to appreciate, to step back and to see everything that he gave me in my life, the lessons that he taught me that to this day have formed who I am. And it gave me a chance to appreciate that and share that with him. I made it was, aside from the you can't disparage your siblings rule in the guardianship agreement, I knew my father had not much time left, and I wanted him to know that his life mattered. Not just to me, but to all the people he came in contact with in his life. I wanted him to understand how much I appreciated what he gave, not just to me, but to other people. He fought corruption in our township. He taught me that you just keep going, you keep fighting. Even if it's impossible and you're not going to win, the battle is worth it. He taught me that there are no people who are better than others. Everybody is the same, and you treat everybody the same. My parents taught me about integrity, and I went through these lessons that my dad gave me. And at one point, he stopped me, put his hand on my arm, and he said, "Thank you. I needed to know that." So I know. And that's what I told a friend of mine was going through the same thing. Her mother was in hospice, and she was all over the place. She was worried and everything about her mother, and, I got to get her this care and that care. I said, no, you need to spend the time with her. You're never going to get that back. And in those moments that you share, those are the happiest memories I have of my dad, or the times I spent with him when he was homebound. those are the moments I cherish the most because I made the most of those times I had with him. And there was nothing else distracting us. And in some ways, it was even better because there were no distractions. It was just us, two people,
Yeah.
So I would not have given that up for anything.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful, not just story, but a powerful lesson in end of life, right? Something that stuck with me that you said the first time we chatted was that spending time with them is never something that you're going to regret.
Yeah.
And
No.
I think that's such a wonderful outlook on end of life care in general. You've shared a lot of lessons with us in the past almost hour. And
Wow.
as we start wrapping up, I know we could probably talk about this for another hour, but
Yeah, there's a lot.
I know. But before we wrap up, are there any other lessons that you feel are imperative for, caregivers or other people in your situation that you've learned that you'd like to share?
I think the most important lesson, particularly when you're dealing with a family dynamic, is once you make a decision that you are going to give whatever level of care that you give, that's your decision to make. And it can cause tremendous burdens and tremendous harm to you. But part of the reason why you may have bad dynamics in the family is if you have the expectation that everybody else is going to give the same amount. It's not going to happen. There's always going to be people who feel that they can give more for whatever reasons, whether people have a feeling that they're not able to, that they're incompetent, or I think I would screw it up. Whatever the reason is, there's going to be people who give different amounts. And you have to accept that. And the thing that you focus on is doing what you can do. And then also taking care of yourself. I didn't have, I got basically abandoned by my immediate family, but I did have my father's sister who helped me out, even helped me out a little bit financially. I had my mother's sister and my uncle. They were support systems. And the one person I credit the most is my voice teacher, a friend of mine I've had for 40 years. And many of my lessons I would go for a lesson and all I would do is just break down and cry and sob. And she never told me what to do. She never said, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. She just let me feel and let me get this out. And if you have people like that around you, it might not be your family. Those are the people you go to. Or if you can, find a really good therapist, because dealing with a lot of this, it's so much of an overwhelming emotion. I still have certain things that give me PTSD about this. It can be very traumatic, even if it's a good situation, even if you don't go through what I went through, there can be lasting effects on you emotionally, whatever may happen. And making sure that you have people around who just for the support and just so that you can release is so important.
Deborah, thank you so much for sharing such a powerful personal story with us. I'm so grateful to you.
It was a pleasure being here. And I hope I can offer people some help if they're navigating the same situations.